In order to ensure that student voice was present in this plenary session, Will led the students through a brainstorming session on Monday to create a basis for today's conversation. They came up with some pretty pressing questions for this distinguished panel. There will be no softballs on this plenary. This session will be led by the one and only Bobby Lauer. Her visionary leadership is what makes this student work possible, and I could not be more grateful for her support as we explore this new terrain. So I would like to invite up Bobby and our panel to the stage, so please welcome Deanna Villanueva-Cesedo, Associate Vice Chancellor for Center for Excellence in Inclusion and Democracy with the Maricopa Community Colleges, Terry Taylor, Strategy Director for Innovation Discovery at the Lumina Foundation, Timothy Eatman, the inaugural Dean of the Honors Living Learning Community and Professor of Urban Education at Rutgers University, Newark, and Kristen Shaveridan, Program Director of Free Expression and Education for PEN America. Thank you all.
Good morning. Thank you, Natalie. First of all, congratulations to everybody for making it to Wednesday morning and this plenary. Yeah, that is no short order. I am honored to be joined by these friends and colleagues, and we are going to keep this very informal between us. They all are incredibly accomplished, and I'm going to trust all of you to look up all of those bios. I'm going to refer to them all by first name. And as Natalie said, the meat of this plenary conversation is going to be generated by the students and the questions that they had as we think about the path forward and we think about what is next for this movement that we are all deeply committed to. But to have us start, I'm going to go to the end and work my way down. I'd like you to all, and we're going to try to keep this spicy and brief, as they say. So if you could just quickly start by sharing your story and path to civic and community engagement. And we'll start with you, Tim.
Thanks a lot, Bobby. It's a delight to be here with all of you and these distinguished colleagues. My story is really connected to ministry and education. My family is in ministry. My dad's been pastoring for 42 years in New York City, was in the New York City public school system as a teacher, and decided that he would not settle for the lackluster way in which students of color in particular were being treated there. Went to seminary, got called to a church, started a school at the church about 6 months after he left the New York City public school system. We were dazed, right? I was in 8th grade, and I was thinking, oh, okay, they have to do a feasibility study, right? It's going to take 2 or 3 years to make it happen. No, we were in our church social hall. There were 5 people in my graduating class. But that's really where I cut my teeth on this notion of robust community engagement. And for me, it's always at the nexus of the life of the spirit and the life of the mind and the life of the body. And so I carry that spirit with me as I go forward, as I think about the things that we did in dynamic ways, in a small way, but in a community. And that led me to be curious about ways that I could advance that, Bobby, in the context of my work in graduate school and beyond. And I see the manifestations of it even in the work that we're doing with students in the Newark community who very much are connected to their faith practices and to their civic organizations. And that's really been a blessing for me. But my story really pivots around being introduced to deep community engaged work at the nexus of the life of the spirit and the life of the mind and body.
Awesome. Deanna, before you start, I just have to add this because I think everyone here will love it. Tim is not kidding. On Sunday, I went to go get Starbucks, and I found this wonderful person sitting there at the table, and I tried to walk over and say, hey, Tim, are we ready for next week? And he was like, hold on, hot second. And he was currently running the Zoom for his father's parish. And he said, I started at COVID being responsible as the tech help support. And hold on, I got to make sure it's set up before we dive in. So just a symbol of how that service continues. Deanna.
So similar to Tim, my origin story starts with, I blame my dad for everything that I do. So he grew up, his parents were farm workers. My mom grew up in a very small border community in Arizona. And there wasn't a lot of opportunity for them. And they always instilled this fact that if you are blessed enough to have resources and support, you have to pay it forward. So he says he barely graduated high school, his words, not mine, by the skin of his teeth, because his teachers recognized he spent more time in the fields than the classroom. He struggled with English, but he always had this sense of duty to others. So he was a union organizer, worked as a grievance chairperson in Arizona, right to work state, so you can imagine that. And he would come home, we would sit at the dining room table, and I remember being in junior high, and he would explain in English, Spanish, Spanglish sometimes, what was occurring at work, and then I would help him complete the grievance forms in English. And so very early on, he gifted me with the power of my own voice. And that's really powerful, and that has stayed with me. So my career trajectory has included 10 years in ministry, 10 years in municipalities, and now over a decade in education. But the common thread is, how do we give voice to others, and how do we use our voice to empower the voice of others? And so that has always been integral to my work.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here, and I had so much fun thinking about this question. And I love the variety of all of us here. And you know, I really come from the arts. When I thought about this question, that was where I went first. I was a performer, a creator, and I was really interested in how we worked in public spaces and community spaces. So I did forms called site-specific art, which is really thinking about art that's not on these stages, right? So out in different venues, I've performed on subways and in bathrooms, believe it or not, and in public parking lots, in parks, on city streets. And I often think about who am I in this space, and how am I connecting to the voices and the stories of the people here? How am I bringing them into the fold? How am I, am I swooping in, or am I coming and pulling, and working with, right? And so those were always kind of threads for me and how I was approaching work. And I was questioning a lot, should I be doing this? Do I belong here? Where am I going? What are these stories? How are we connected? Who am I amplifying? Who's my audience? And so I was just surrounded by questions, and that brought me to say, well, I should go back to school. So why not have another art degree? So I went back and I got a degree in socially engaged art practice. And at the root of socially engaged art practice is engagement, right? So it's about really saying that it's the practice, the engagement is the art, and that really spoke to me, and it's allowed me to think more expansively about the different work that I do and where I am, and how how I can work with a lot of different communities. And I think that was kind of the beauty of it, is when you're kind of seeing yourself as a socially engaged artist, you can work in so many different fields, with scientists, with different educators, with people from all different walks, and advocating for so many different things, different missions. And so as I was moving through that and having all these questions and thinking about my role as an artist, I always taught. And that thread of teaching was also me exploring, how do we ethically teach art specifically that was perhaps showing violence or other, maybe sexual assault was really interesting work that I was following. And so I was teaching this, I was doing other art, and kind of how these all came together were always questions for me. So I was thinking about how to be how to be a teacher, how to think about impact. And so I say these because I feel like they came together, and I'm now at Penn America, and I teach and run programming on how to uphold free expression, academic freedom, and inclusion on campuses. And I really see myself as partnering, with a lot of all of you folks in the room, and others, and DEI professionals and faculty, and so how all of these threads, that's how you could say I was a dancer, my image of how these all come together. It's very, very visual, but for me, all these threads came together, and that's kind of how I ended up doing this work. And I'm really grateful that I get to kind of continue that feeling of partnering with so many different people in this current field that I'm doing.
So I thought of my parents too. I grew up in a little town, small city in Appalachia, and it was just part of my childhood. you go to where your mom's volunteering and you draw on the blackboard. Maybe there's a photocopier. That's the real. One time we camped on my elementary school playground to watch over the playground equipment when it got delivered because my dad had volunteered to be the foreman to build the playground. I got picked up by the church van in middle school, and this was not a nice church van, because then I had to go help with the own. So I think it was just sort of like service is what you do as a person. But Appalachia is a very distinct kind of community, and as I went to college, I was thinking of, and I was like, I wanted to get to know other communities, and so actually, I'm like, I did AmeriCorps and I did Peace Corps, right? Like I did, partly because, so I taught migrant students, which gave me some ESL experience, so I got to go do Peace Corps. And the reason I did Peace Corps was not actually a life of service. It was because they were going to send me abroad and give me health care. Like it was that kind of thing. So I think that, and then, as I've gotten through, I think I always sort of idolize these systems of like, we give back, but we have these, and the longer I've been working, I've realized the systems don't actually support everybody if they should. And they don't always reward people for the kind of community, and not every community is able to be supported. So I think that what I'm excited to get to do as a funder, but also as a partner with groups like this, actually almost everybody here, is how do we both protect the systems we have, but also evolve them to meet the moment, and that's new opportunities, but also new voices. And so I'm like super stoked for everybody to hear what questions the students came up with, because they're hard, but essential for us to grapple with.
Awesome. Okay, so let's get right into it. And so what we're gonna do, we had a lot of questions, and we narrowed it down to 4. We wanna try to get through them, which means that we're gonna, again, try to keep it spicy and brief. I'm gonna ask a couple panelists to specifically respond, but I wanna keep it open and honest. So if I don't come to you and you're like, hold on, I have something I need to add to this, please jump in. Our first question comes from Jessica and Sonai, and they asked, power dynamics. How can students advocate for themselves when the structures are not horizontal? And further, what is it going to take for students not just to have a seat at the table, but for their voices to be taken serious and heard? And I'm going to start with you, Terry.
Yeah. So I love this question, and I think about it a lot. And I also want to reframe it a little bit. And I actually want to use the Student Design Fellows as an example of what it takes to actually engage students. So first of all, you had to have an organization that already had trust and reach into a lot of higher ed. Every single one of the Student Design Fellows, I got to have dinner with them last night, a faculty member told them, I think this opportunity would be great for you. And so I think they need somebody to sort of bring them in. And you needed an organization to prioritize student engagement. And so Bobby, you did that. You pitched me on 4 different things. You're like, I really want to do the student one. And so, it was something we wanted to do because I think students clarify what our task is better than anybody else. And why is that? One, because they're the only ones who experience our institutions holistically. They see all these systems in a way that's hard for us in our siloed ways to see. And they see through a lot of the stuff that we worry about. But anyway. So they were great staff. Will and Morgan are supporting these students to actually work through a process. They are giving them space to make that process themselves. I think a lot of times we're like, oh, good students are here. They are the best advocates for what we already decided. So we have to give them space and trust. I gotta say, this panel, we had a whole prep session, not on this. We heard on Sunday, hey, the students wanna come with questions, but we can't do them until Monday. So adults being willing to throw away our plan and let them guide us so we can actually work together. I think that, so I just wanted to give kudos to this panel. But the other thing that I wanted to say is it's not fair to put this on students' shoulders. I'm haunted by something that X Gonzalez, who was a leader coming out of the Parkland shooting, wrote last year, where she said, I'm trying to figure out how to be an activist again, but I can't continue the way of being. I'm not sure I would survive that. It is not fair for us to say things like, the students are going to lead us out of this. Especially in my climate work, I hear this all the time. We have to create spaces for them to be able to contribute, and we have to take on what they're saying and figure out how to do that. So I don't think it's on students to figure out how do we come with the best message and knock on the door. It's us inviting them in, teaching them how systems work, and how do we sort of build this up. We've lost a lot of student infrastructure over the last 20 years, and I'm thrilled to see that Campus Comeback may want to take some of that on. So.
Kristen, you're working on campuses in a really tough moment. Yeah. And what are you seeing in terms of when we think about this, about students really being in a position to create change? Where are you seeing their momentum, and where are you seeing barriers?
Yeah, I think we go to campuses and we'll do workshops, and we do workshops with all, students, faculty, staff, leaders, everyone. And with students, one of the things I'm thinking when I thought of this question about momentum, one of the things I've noticed, I've been at Penn 2.5 years now. When I first started, it seemed like if I met someone on campus, oh, we're interested in your work, tell us what you do, can we partner? It was really faculty, deans, leadership spaces. And really, where I'm seeing, it's actually been a really, it feels sudden, but it kind of crept up, and then, in the last 6 months or whatever, certainly took over, is, oh my God, students, can you come talk to students? Can we work with students? How do we bring students into this? So I think there's a really large recognition that we need to be working with students. Students need to be part of the conversation. One of the things that I did a few months ago, which was really great, which was if we're going to plan a program with a campus, like we need students on this committee. Like what are they actually want from us? What can we answer? How can we? What questions are they curious about? And they brought up all kinds of things, around. Real questions that they had, like, I feel like I can't talk in my class. I feel like I have to, hold back. I'm really worried about my grade for my opinions. And I was actually surprised how much they wanted to actually just like, what is academic freedom? Can we talk about that? Like, what does it really mean? And so that was a great moment to say, okay, let's build this thing around what you want. So I feel like those are really great, places of momentum that are moving forward. And I'll echo that I think having kind of trusted leaders, mentors, like bring students into it. So I know we've often talked, I've been hearing at the conference of like, how do you get students to come? And is it not just the same students who get to do these over and over again or who show up? And so one of the things we did, and it was really, the campus came up with it, but I thought it worked wonderfully, was to have, really think outside kind of just the student leaders or who's seen as leaders, but like just a student in your class that you might nominate, who just, you feel like they might find this interesting because you read something they said, or something they said or posted or anything. And so having like more voices and more people come in who may not be the typical, I thought that was a really successful model. And we got so many students there. So I think there's different approaches that, that's sort of my hopeful side, but I definitely think that, it's just starting, and that a lot of some of the barriers around knowing how to be in these spaces, like this institutional and the systems, to me also go back to teaching students about like free expression and academic freedom and how we're supporting those and inclusion on the campus and kind of understanding how that works. And I think those barriers can kind of keep some people from being a part of these conversations.
Tim, were you trying to jump in? No. You're good. We're using hands. Okay. Let's go to the next question. And Dan, I'm going to start with you on this one. So Rue and Cynthia asked, DEI is being attacked in red states, but in blue states, it's almost lip service when it comes to how DEI is actually being considered in decision-making and funding decisions. An example they used, they said, look, a school might have a great land acknowledgement publicly, but then they're buying up all the land in the community without actual input from students or the community members.
Yeah. So, brilliant question. If our students are out there, kudos to you for asking. I think this is a moment in time where we as a sector have to ask ourselves hard questions. Where we are anchoring our work and how we are doing the work. Where are we wanting to plant our flags? And I really appreciate the example of the tribal land acknowledgement. This is an ongoing conversation with me and some of my staff. Spent countless hours trying to develop a statement to put in your email line, but if you can't tell me your Indigenous student enrollment, if you can't tell me your Indigenous student persistence rates, if you can't tell me what you are doing to support Indigenous student success and report back to tribal communities that are supporting scholarships for their students, then I don't want to hear what's in your email statement. There you go. So, again, it is easy to demonize, we are being attacked, and those people are doing it to us. If we take that approach only without asking ourselves, the hard questions, we are no better than them. So this is a moment in time where I think we really need to think through, where are we planting our flags in the sand? And it is on those statements or the performative statements that go onto web pages, or is it the actual strategies that are supporting diverse student success? And so if we as a sector aren't willing to ask ourselves those questions, and in some cases course correct, then we just add fuel to that fire that demonizes us. And I think we also have to think about where we anchor this work. It is too easy. Higher ed loves silos. We all know that, right? We have silos and acronyms for everything. If we cannot develop an integrated framework for this approach, and you just said in your last response, academic freedom and understanding, this concept and that concept, unless we can provide an integrated framework for us as colleagues and for our students to understand what does inclusion mean, what does shared governance mean, what does academic freedom mean, what does freedom of expression mean, then we have silos that are very vulnerable to attack and to dismissal, especially for my sector, community colleges out in the audience, under-resourced as a sector, and still serving the students with highest need. Right. And so that leaves us very vulnerable to having core services just simply scrapped. So how do we as an institution and as a sector, again, examine where we're doing our work, how we're doing our work, and unless we can provide an integrated framework and an anchor for where DEI lives, then we will have this ongoing conversation.
Tim, what do you think?
Well, how do we get to a place where DEI is truly embedded? I resonate so powerfully with all of the things that you said. And I'm really wanting to lift up the importance of something that was said earlier about listening to the students, listening to their stories and taking them seriously. One of the blessings that I have with our work at Rutgers is that about half of our students are from Newark, right? And so when they go and they do their community engaged work, they're not going into the community, they're going home. Right? It's with mama and them, right? It's at their mosques and their churches and their synagogues and their civic engagement organizations. And so, I use this statistic all the time because it's just so powerful. In the last 10 years, Rutgers Newark has seen an increase of 80%, 80% Newark residents who are enrolled at Rutgers University in Newark.
Wow. That's amazing.
That's no joke. That's no joke. And it's because the students know that they belong and they'll be listened to and that they're welcomed, right? And it really got me buzzing when I thought about something I heard at a conference I was at UCLA a couple days ago. Jeff Stoll at Georgetown University Center on Education and the Workforce talked about how, in our admissions, we're like returning to what we used to do. It doesn't make any sense, right? I mean, reliance on the SAT, when the challenges of these socioeconomic status issues are real, right? He reminded us that there's a significant gap in college attainment between low-income students and their high-income peers, with only 29% of low-income students moving into the top SES quartile by age 25. Compare that to 65% of high-income students. So how are we going to have any of this stuff embedded if we're returning to the nonsense that it was clear we really didn't need that so much when we went to the pandemic, right? If everything paused. So why are we doing that? And the consequences that are so important really need to be put on the table. Last thing I'll say, at the conference as well, President L. Song Richardson from Colorado College was there. That's a bad sister there.
Yeah.
She bad. She announced that she's stepping down from the presidency, right? Because she said, I'm not going to be muzzled. How are we going to embed DI? We need real leaders. I'm not trying, yeah, that's right. I'm not trying to embarrass you, Paul Pribbenow. We need those kind of presidents.
That's right.
And this is with respect to her as well. She made her choice, she made her decision, but we are not going to get to a place of being embedded at all if we're not paying attention to the kinds of leadership we need and the decisions that we're making about the way forward for our institutions.
Powerful. Okay, I'm looking at the time. I'm going to keep us moving.
Okay.
Questions are really good. So
Yeah, I want to make
through
sure we
them
get to them all. Okay, Markea asked, we know addressing polarization is a critical need, and we've heard that again and again here. But how do we balance freedom of expression with student emotional safety? Kristen, no surprise, I'm going to ask you to respond first, and then I'm going to ask
Yeah.
everybody to kind of jump in if
Yeah,
they'd like.
yeah, I mean, I think this is the question that I probably spend the most of my time talking to campuses about and thinking about with our partners, our amazing consultants that we work with, including Lara Schwartz, who talked yesterday. So I feel like, you know, this is, I think, at its most essential. One of the things I often say is it is essential that campuses do both, right? It's not, there's no, not one over the other. And so I actually come out of the framing of balancing, because I think it can kind of create a sense that they're on these two sides and we're going to do sort of some balancing of them. And in fact, I think we really want to come to a place where they're integral, right? We cannot have a campus with true free expression for everyone without upholding inclusion and safety for all. And we also need to, you know, keep that robust free expression in order to keep the mission of the university and bring people of diverse voices together. And so I think that these two, what I often think of them along with kind of academic freedom as these three balls that I'm holding on to both, or all three at the same time, and where they intersect, right, where we can uphold them. So I think just to get into like, okay, then how do we actually do that? And you know, some of it is absolutely acknowledging that the brunt of when freedom of expression causes offense is not evenly or equally distributed, right? So just at least acknowledging and knowing that, acknowledging that historic access to freedom of expression has not been enjoyed equally by all. And from there, kind of campuses really saying, okay, so how do we uphold freedom of expression, academic freedom, and address the impact, right? And I do think that campuses can do that, but I do think it's gonna, in the long view, this needs to be really embedded is the word I'm hearing, but really like major shifts to how this work is done across campuses so that it's not a pop-in workshop, it's not like a one-off, it's not an orientation module, but it's really embedded as we're thinking about DEI and inclusion, but these are all embedded, you know, throughout campus. Back to my visual, you know, like this spider web or something, you know, like the web of learning, and that these are in courses, they're in different experiences. They might be in orientation, but it's all of it. So I think it becomes like a foundation for campuses. And so I think that, you know, we're in a reactive moment, and a lot of times campuses are sort of figuring these out in reaction to crises. And we know, obviously, this is the moment we're in now, and they must respond, right? Absolutely. Thinking about how can we respond to the students impacted? How are we thinking about safety? If it's physical safety, is it what are the support services students need? Mental health, you know, student services, religious support services, the doxing, you know, are they safe online? I think there are things that campuses can put into place, and again, it's not just one thing. Talking to students, reaching out, right, are things that campuses absolutely can do, and they can do that and also uphold free expression. And what I often say to campuses, for leaders or whomever asks me really, anyone at all, is I'm like, yes, uphold free expression and here's the and that's the big stuff, right? So there are so many things that can be done, and again, that's the proactive, right? That's the long-term visioning of how we really, you know, embed these programs, really bake it into the campus experience. And the last thing I'll say, if I may, I don't want to talk too long, but just to say that I'm always amazed by how there's I don't know, sort of assumption, I hope it's changing, that students show up and to campus and they're gonna somehow get academic freedom, which is not a concept that has existed for them ever, right? And so we can teach these things, and this might be the educator in me, but it's like these things don't have to exist in silos, or sort of like, you might get it if you're here long enough, or absorb it, or figure it out, but like, we can just teach it. It's really, we can teach it. We can help students understand freedom of expression, why historically, actually, freedom of expression has been integral to social justice movements, right, throughout history. Why what the dangers are of curtailing freedom of expression and who that will actually ultimately come after. And we see it and we know it. And so I think learning that can do a lot in service of both upholding freedom of expression and addressing students and being included and being a part of it and really feeling supported by their campuses. And the very last thing I will say is, you know, I've been in a lot of dialogues. I'm so curious. I want to be in conversation with all of you and my panelists around this, but kind of unpacking a little bit some of the language around safety, unsafe, harm, being uncomfortable, and how we kind of navigate these different words, what they mean, how we help students maybe process that, how we help staff process that. So when a student comes and says, I've been harmed by this thing, there can be some dialogue around that and around expectations of what might happen next. And often what the reality is, most often it's not that the professor is going to get fired, but again, fill in the and column, right? We can still address the person in front of us. We can still hear them and respond to that. And none of that takes away academic freedom. None of that takes away freedom of expression. So those are kind of the ways that I think about it. But again, it's a lot of balls in the air, and it's really trying to bring it together as much as possible.
Anybody else want to jump in on this one?
I really appreciate your thread around education. And I think that is where we have the best hope of reaching, again, this integrated framework for how we support our students. Our students aren't plants. They're not going to get this through osmosis. What we have to do is really talk them through, what do these concepts mean? We toss around academic freedom, and then they start tossing around academic freedom, and they don't always have a shared meaning. The same with freedom of speech, freedom of expression. So I think our best hope is to really teach them their rights and responsibilities as scholars in our spaces. And however, it's nuanced in your community. So in Arizona, if you watch the news, we've got lots going on. There are very specific, thank you for the sympathy laugh there, Tim. So if you watch our news, there's lots happening in our spaces, and we have very specific state statutes around free access to campus. And our students ask, why are you allowing them? And we've never taken the time to teach them because our laws dictate that. And more importantly, education is a space for you to encounter ideas that are different from yourselves. And unless we make that leap for them and help them make that leap for themselves, this is where we hear, you know, I've been harmed, I've been aggrieved, and we have to get beyond that. How are we proactively teaching them what these very core fundamental concepts to our institutions really mean?
Terry, do you want to, oh, sorry. Go Terry and then Tim.
No.
Yep.
I also think we have to, one, realize this is very hard. Creating community is hard, teaching across difference is hard, and polarization is not a standalone thing. You got to build resistance against misinformation. You got to help people feel welcome. You got to build systems to welcome people who've never felt that they deserved education. Like we have to do all that, and we have to think about who are the students coming to us today. And what's changed since we were students? Students today are more likely to have grown up in a racially or economically segregated community than even 20 years ago. They're not coming with experience with how to see someone different than them. They're also, there's research that shows if you go through an epidemic, those generations, it takes 20 years to rebuild levels of trust than those people who go through an epidemic in their formative years, than those who do not. They have been able to Google things their entire lives. And how you develop that spidey sense that this misinformation is not right, that takes education, that takes training. So all this stuff means we actually have to do stuff differently. And I also don't want it to make it seem like it's all on students to be the perfect vessels for this. We have to retrain our faculty, our staff, to how to do this well and create protections and safety for everyone doing that. Because we have to do it when hired as a target. And so I think that we in philanthropy are trying to think through how do we help people have space for that, because it can be very hard. But I just want to think like this isn't, we have to be more thoughtful about who is coming through our doors right now. And teaching at Newark, when you've got 50% of your students, is very different than when you were teaching 10 years ago. There's opportunity in that, but there's also you're training students for a different kind of pathway maybe. And so, anyway, I'll stop there.
Yeah, I was just going to look to the evidentiary base as well. I mean, we have structures and evidence that let us know that, for example, with the high impact practices for student success, if we use them equitably, you know, you can't do that without having a thread of socio-emotional intelligence through all of them, right? And this is where we're lacking really in powerful ways. I mean, I want to just emphasize the emotional by adding, psychic and emotional, right? I'll just tell a quick story. I have one of my daughters is in a doctoral program in STEM, and she was at her research site and went to the bathroom and walked in the bathroom, and someone walking out saw her and said, "Ah!" Scared. Grabbed her stuff. My daughter's like, "You all right?" "Oh, I was just startled." Right? Yeah, we all know what it was, right? This little brown girl, she looked like she's 12, right? And so, we're talking. She says, "Papa, do I make this place scary?" I don't know if we got any parents in the room. Do I make this place? So when we think about, and I says, "Baby, no, right? This is the 20 years you taught. This is what she's been taught, this lady, right? That you make the place scary. It's what we saw with the Goon Squad here. I was looking at the news before I came down, right? This idea of the hierarchy of human value that's being dealt with so powerfully with the TRHT campus centers and other work. But I think that we really have to understand how important it is for us to take students seriously, that they are experiencing these stifling things, and if they don't have anywhere to unpack it, right? Like, baby girl had me, right? And I was like, "Nah, that lady crazy, right? That's not you, right?" But how can we lift these things up in the context of the frameworks that we have to make students' success optimal?
Thank you. Okay. Emmanuel and Keone asked, a lot of civic engagement, access, and participation comes down to economics. The reality is that for many of our peers, they don't have the privilege or ability to opt in to civic engagement experiences. And they also don't see a financially viable career path in this social change work. What are we going to do about that? And Deanna, I'm going to ask you to start.
So again, coming from a sector that is resource challenged right out of the gate, this is an ongoing discussion for us. And I think particularly in a post-pandemic world, it's really, the onus is on us to rethink how we form our civic engagement opportunities for students. And I'm going to call out my colleague, Bernice, who presented earlier in the week about the curse of convenience. It's great if students have the opportunity to visit somewhere and pack food boxes. Do they have the opportunity to examine those root causes why someone needs a food box?
That's right.
And are they partnering with local communities in ways that are impactful the way the organization wants it? And I'm going to recall something that Leroy LaPlante mentioned yesterday. It's the how. How are you intervening with it? Is it our way of support and success, or is it your way of support and success? And unless we as institutions really ask those questions of our partners, we can't rely on our way anymore. We have to learn their way and their needs and their root causes. And so how do we integrate, and that's going to be my common thing, how do we integrate these opportunities in ways that are meaningful where you don't have to have the resources and the privilege to participate? What would it look like for an automotive program to partner with a domestic violence shelter and routinely work on the vans that go out and help women and children move? And build in time to think through why these conditions exist in our community, what resources exist, what part do I play in that journey? What would it be like for students to be able to routinely in a fashion design program work with a nonprofit agency on our campus that prepares under-resourced students for their first job interview? How do we rethink frameworks about community support that isn't convenient for us, but is meaningful for the communities that we seek to serve, and that includes our students?
And we have a lot of evidence about the impact of civic and community engagement on student learning. If you know Ashley Finley, I think she's
right
out there somewhere. We were excited to help support them to do a meta-analysis of the last 10 years of studies that were generalizable, so across more than one institution over more than one term. There were only 56 studies in 10 years.
Wow.
Of those, only 11 disaggregated their data in some way. So we actually don't know. We don't know. Like, you can't just take a 4-year program and tell a community college, can you implement this? There's not enough space on a 2-year degree program. I encourage you to learn about the Community Learning Partnership, a program growing out of De Anza, now in several different states. They just started differently. They started, who are the students we're trying to reach? how do we actually build these new programs within that might change the systems along the way?
Right.
But I think we just need entirely different modalities for this. And I think we also need to be good translators. Like, how do we translate community development, civic engagement, justice concerns, also to workforce things? Community Learning Partnership got a $60 million appropriation from California because they are helping people get into critical jobs. Social workers, nurses, community organizers, nonprofit leaders. And so I think there's just this, and that makes faculty members uncomfortable. What do you mean workforce development?
Right.
But I think there's just, how do we sort of talk about all these things at once and do it not just because it's the right thing to do, because it's also the future of our country. Like, we need these folks in our systems to help solve these intractable problems, and they can get there with support from our colleges and universities, especially community colleges and regional institutions. But we got to do more to actually build those models, which I just don't think we have yet. So I'm so thrilled. The last thing I'll say, these folks at Campus Compact figured out a lot of the people that are doing civic engagement on campuses are now also doing all the basic needs supports for their own students. So what does that mean for also to support not just going out into the community, but actually supporting our own so that they can be able to do?
I was in that meeting with Terry on Saturday, Sunday, whatever day.
It was a day.
It was a day nearby today. But you know, I was so filled by sort of the work of our colleagues there in California to get that kind of set aside, and then to think strategically about how to look at connecting that work throughout the country. The other thing that I would say is we're really sensitive to the entrepreneurialism that operates among our students.
Yes.
I mean, like, they are cutting hair. I mean, I go on YouTube, I see these baking, that's my student. I mean, like, they are, you know, I got one student who works for TikTok, he's got 700,000 followers, you know what I mean? It's like, dude, what is going on? Like they have these ideas. So we've established an urban solutions lab, and it's not only for business students. Bring your idea. Let's workshop it with some community partners. What do you need, right? And how do we expand their sensitivity to entrepreneurialism? Last thing I'm gonna say here is this. Like you, I think, are underwhelmed in general about how community engagement addresses issues of economics. Even in my own education, as an educational sociologist, you know, the economical dimensions of my work are something that are anemic. I'll just be honest. It's embarrassing, but I'm constantly trying to figure out how to do. I don't think we need to always be having our hand out. I think that there are ways that we can think about how to leverage current spends, even in our systems, towards the generation of resources. I mean, you know, you think about what folks have done by bringing community together and sort of figuring out how to translate that to larger economic needs, and I think that there's a shrinking imagination as it relates to the economic dimensions of our work in many ways.
I just want to, add one thing onto that, and I, you know, where I stay and what I do is kind of to look to the experts, right? Like you all doing this work when we're partnering with you. But one of the things that I'm thinking about then is in that work, right, is we're bringing it. And we're bringing maybe a workshop or a program to your students or to anyone in your campus, is how we then bake in addressing some of those needs, right, from like from the foundation. So an example of this is we do some summer programming with high school students, and we're on only our third year now, but one of the things that we, like, right away, of course, realized, which, you know, we should have known from the beginning, but we were able to then put into the funding for it, is transportation for all the students, food for all the students, seeing if they, you know, would they normally be working that week? Do they need a stipend for that week? So that it comes all the way back, honestly, to like us writing it into our proposals, right? And telling the funder, no, these aren't just extraneous, right? These are essential to make these work. So I think that's some way in which we can, kind of from where I sit, as someone who does the programming side, is how, and partnerships, honestly, is thinking about how we can bake some of those needs to help bring, you know, these students in, and be the kind of people to also, you know, work with the funders who are funding our work to make it essential that this happens. So that's just one example I was thinking about there.
Awesome. Okay, we're almost out of time. We have a little bit more than the scary clock.
Okay.
I've been looking at that, I'm looking at Tim's watch, and I'm like, I think
we're
we're fine.
We're a little extra time, yeah.
We're doing pretty good, I think.
Yeah, but we're doing good. So we're on our last question. So look, in wrapping this up, and we're also, coming to the end of the conference too, but, what is your call to action? When we think about our field and our movement, what do you want to leave people with? And I'm just going to go down the line. So I'll start with you, Terry.
All of this work feels huge, and democracy, authoritarianism, and we don't know what to do with that, but I think all of us have something. We go home, maybe it's a student, maybe it's a colleague, maybe it's just giving grace to somebody, but there's something we can do, and that leads towards our democracy. But I think also we have to work harder to not just invite people to the table, but give them space to actually contribute. I've learned over the years that the response isn't oh, good, you're here, now you can support our thing that we've already developed. You actually have to give folks time and space to think of something else. I'm working with some indigenous scholars in Arizona creating dreaming spaces. I don't actually, as a funder, I have to advocate for this. I don't actually know what they're going to come up with. It's probably not going to be, we just learn time and time again, you can't pre-bake solutions for people that you want to serve. So I think it's, how do we give time and space to develop new ideas, build and nourish networks, and build trust with systems that may have never been particularly open to these new voices. And when I think about the kinds of places, there's 750 people here doing the kind of work that's not just good for students and not just fulfilling for us personally, but it's key to how we rebuild trust in higher ed. In America is people in communities seeing our work make tangible difference for people who get degrees and people who don't. And so I think that I hope all of you just feel empowered and supported, and also that you feel you can help us understand what do you need to do more. And so with that, I'll pass it on.
Yeah. I'll be brief. I was thinking a lot about this, and some of the words that came, to mind is, obviously education is what I lean into so much. It's the uniqueness of higher education and its ability to do this. I was thinking about listening, that I'm talking a lot about free expression and its role for advocacy, but I'm also thinking about its role in helping us be better listeners, and how it's also about us being in better dialogue with each other, and understanding how to have respectful conversations. So for me, a lot of the work is kind of being in partnership and really helping to listen, and our work listen, but to you all, to students, to what the needs are, and also help to educate around these things, and think of how we can come up with some better programs and really useful ways to kind of help the whole fabric of higher education do this work.
So my homework for you all, didn't realize you were going to get homework attention.
Faculty member alert.
I love that.
Is to really go back and rethink our processes and systems and models. We can't keep expecting to have great outcomes by doing things the same way. We have a very different student population. We have very different community dynamics, especially post-pandemic, very different economic conditions. Unless we take the time to rethink how we are doing our work, where we are anchoring our work, we won't have the levels of success that we all want to see. So how can we think strategically and creatively and rethink what we do as higher ed? And I know that's really hard for us as a sector, right? We have ways we do things, and the ways that we've always done them that may not serve us well moving into the future. So how do we get creative? How do we look at integrated frameworks and meaningful connections with our community partners? How do we really rethink the models and ways in which we behave as a sector? And you have to build in some time to actually think it through. I know what your all calendars look like. So my recommendation, book a time for yourself to just think and process. Otherwise, you just get caught up in the day-to-day, and we can all turn into those hamsters on the wheel. We're super busy, but we're not necessarily making any progress. So that would be my homework.
I'm so grateful that we had such astute students to provoke us with these challenging questions. It reminds me that even in this time of eclipse, there is light. Yeah. And I think we have to see the light of our young people. And we have to recognize the deep responsibility for us to realize that a lot of the attacks we're experiencing within the DEI space, or whatever you want to call it, one of my friends called it the JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, JEDI, I like that. But no matter what you call it, the charge really is to understand the urgency of that, to realize that we can't do the same thing and expect different results. And that requires that we take seriously the work of imagining. The work of imagining means that we will look to the humanists and the artists and say, how do we convene a dream circle, a dream space, right? What does that look like? What is it to have a story circle and then a policy meeting about criteria for promotion and tenure? The humanities and the arts have these structures and methodologies for us. But we're so siloed and astute and learned, doctor, that we don't do it, right? And so let us challenge each other around the urgency of this moment to think about the creativity needed and the prophetic imagination that it is going to require for us to operationalize our gifts and skills toward the next years that we need.
Please join me in thanking the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you. I must say, it is so important to have each other in this moment, and I must say, when I thought about who to have on the stage, I'm thankful that everybody I thought of said yes. We have all benefited from Tim's incredible work, and when I think about our field, I think first and foremost about full participation and how that has shaped so much of my practice and work. I met Deanna 2 years ago, right when I came to Campus Compact, and was blown away, as I know all of you are here, and asked Deanna right there, can you help us rethink and reimagine what Compact can do to seriously center community colleges? And she's been a fellow with us for the past 2 years. Sure. Kristen, I don't know as well, but Penn America, and I must give a shout out to Jeremy Young, who has been someone I have spent more time with the past years than almost anyone. Yes, Jeremy, let him know. He was at a totality vacation for his 10-year anniversary.
All right.
But the work of Penn is truly a backbone for all of us and their fight in this moment. Terry has been a colleague for years, and when I made this transition to Compact, she was really willing to listen. And she's been there to really make investments and has stood behind them. And foundations are big organizations, but they're made up of people. Yeah. And Terry is a true partner.
I thought you were saying I'm a true person.
You are a true person. She's a true partner who made a long trip to be here and has been here for days. I mean, being in the meeting on Sunday. But I can see right in front of me, I am really thankful to our philanthropic partners. So I can see Michael Murray from Martha Viney Davis Foundations is here. They all sat up right up front, which is great. Then Derek and Brad from the Kettering Foundations and Lumina Foundation. I know Joelle and Katie are in the audience as well. So please, another round of applause for these three foundations that make it happen. We are right on time. I'm so excited we have announced it, but I just want to be crystal clear. Compact is in this for the long haul. We are going to be doing this national conference every year. We are excited and hopeful that you will be joining us next year in Atlanta for Compact 25. And just a heads up, we'll be in Chicago for Compact 26. So start thinking about that. I think, Molly, do we have a slide, a picture to throw up there? There we are. I want to really thank our Compact team. I'd like to ask all of them that are here to please stand up. Stand up. I can see you in the green shirts. Please, they're in the back, they're in the front. It has been a real labor of love, and we appreciate you, but I really appreciate them. And this is not it. This feels like the go team, but really we have 2 more great blocks of sessions. And I know we got to get to those rooms. So thank you all. We will see you soon.
Actually, just one quick round of applause for Bobby.
Yeah. Bobby!
Okay. Here we go. Okay. Be well. Travel safe home.